Let me describe a moment you might recognize. Your daughter calls on a Sunday evening. She sounds busy. You can hear the kids in the background, the clatter of dishes. But she says something that's supposed to make you feel better. She says, "Don't worry, Mom. I've got everything handled. I already talked to your doctor. I found a meal delivery service. I even looked into that assisted living place Sarah mentioned." And for a second, maybe two, you feel a wave of relief. Someone is paying attention. Someone cares. But then the call ends, and you sit there in the quiet of your living room, and a strange feeling settles over you. Not anger exactly, not sadness, something harder to name. And then it hits you. Nobody asked what you wanted. Not once during that entire conversation did anyone say, "What would help you most right now?" Or, "How are you feeling about all of this?" Or even just, "What do you think?" They made a plan. A good plan, maybe. A loving plan, even. But it was their plan, not yours. I've been a clinical psychologist for over 40 years, and I want to tell you something I've learned that might surprise you. The loneliest moment in aging isn't when nobody shows up. It's when everyone shows up, with a plan they made without you. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 types of adult children who genuinely believe they are caring for their aging parents, but who have never once asked what care actually looks like to the person receiving it. These aren't bad children. Most of them love you deeply. But love without listening, as you're about to see, is a very specific kind of loneliness. If you've ever felt managed instead of loved, I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to share may change the way you understand what's happening, and more importantly, it may give you the words to change it. Before we get into the 5 types, I want to give you a frame for what we're really talking about here, because this isn't about ungrateful children or broken families. This is about something much more subtle and much more common. In developmental psychology, there's a concept Erik Erikson identified decades ago. He called the final stage of life integrity versus despair. And at its core, that stage is about one thing: whether you get to feel that your life, your choices, and your identity still matter, not whether someone else decides they matter for you. Whether you get to hold that authority over your own story. There's another framework I use constantly in my practice. It's called self-determination theory, and it says that human beings, at every age, in every stage, have 3 basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means having a voice in what happens to you. It means being consulted, not just managed. And here's the part that too many families get wrong: that need does not expire at 65. It doesn't diminish because your knees hurt or your memory isn't what it used to be. If anything, autonomy becomes more important as you age, because so many other things are already being taken from you. So when I describe these 5 types of children, I want you to hear them through that lens. This is not about blame. This is about recognition. And recognition is where change begins. Type number 1. I call this child the loving hijacker. You know this child. This is the one who has already called your doctor before you even knew there was an appointment. This is the one who moved the furniture in your living room because they decided it was safer that way. This is the one who shows up with brochures for places you never asked about and says, with total sincerity, "I already handled it." And the thing is, they mean well. They genuinely do. Their heart is in the right place. But their ears are not. The loving hijacker makes decisions for you, not with you. They pick your doctor. They choose your schedule. They rearrange your life with an efficiency that would be impressive if it weren't so suffocating. And when you try to push back, when you say, "I didn't ask for that," they look hurt, confused even, because in their mind, they just did something wonderful. Why aren't you grateful? Here's what's happening beneath the surface. In family systems theory, we talk about role reversal, when a child moves into the executive position in the family hierarchy, and the parent gets pushed down into the role of dependent. The loving hijacker doesn't do this out of cruelty. They do it out of fear. They are terrified of losing you. And their way of managing that fear is to control every variable. If they make every decision, nothing bad can happen. If they handle everything, you'll be safe. But here's what they don't understand, and what I need you to hear clearly. When your child makes every decision for you, they're not caring for you. They're caring for their own anxiety about losing you. And in the process, they are taking away the one thing that makes your life feel like yours. The loving hijacker needs to hear 5 words from you. Ask me what I think. Type number 2, and this one is more painful than it looks on the surface. I call this child the visible martyr. The visible martyr does care for you, but their caregiving always seems to have an audience. This is the child who posts on social media about how exhausting it is to look after an aging parent, with a photo of themselves looking nobly tired. This is the child who tells their siblings, their spouse, their co-workers, everyone, exactly how much they sacrifice. This is the child who sighs loudly when they visit, who checks the time, who says things like, "After everything I do for you," if you dare to ask for something they didn't already plan. And the hardest part? If you tell them you'd rather they just sit with you for 10 quiet minutes instead of doing all the things they do, they take it as an insult. Because for the visible martyr, care is measured in effort, not in attunement. And effort that nobody sees doesn't count. In attachment theory, this pattern often comes from an anxious attachment style. The visible martyr learned, often in childhood, that love is conditional. That you earn it by performing, by being useful, by being seen being useful. Their caregiving isn't fake, but it's filtered through a deep, unspoken question, am I enough? And so they turn your needs into their showcase. Not because they're selfish, but because they genuinely don't know how to love without proving it. The problem is that when caregiving has an audience, it stops being about you. You become a prop in someone else's story. And if you've ever felt guilty for needing something your child didn't already decide to give, you may be living with a visible martyr. If your child's caregiving always has an audience, it was never fully about you. It was about a wound they haven't healed yet. Type number 3, the check writer. This is one of the most misunderstood types, and it may be the most common. The check writer loves you. I have no doubt about that. But their love arrives in packages, bank transfers, and service subscriptions. They set up the meal delivery. They hired the home aide. They sent the new tablet so you can video call, though they themselves rarely call. They upgraded your insurance. They paid for the new recliner. And on paper, it looks like excellent care. Responsible. Thorough. Generous even. But when was the last time this child sat across from you and said, "How are you really?" When was the last time they called without a logistical reason? When was the last time they asked about your day, not your medications, not your appointments, just your day? The check writer provides material comfort in place of emotional presence, and they do it so consistently that it starts to feel normal to both of you. You stop expecting the phone call. You stop hoping for the visit that isn't tied to a task. You adjust. You tell yourself, at least they care enough to send help. But here's what I've seen in 40 years of practice. You can be physically comfortable and profoundly lonely at the same time. Money can buy comfort. It has never once bought the feeling of being known. And most check writers learned this pattern from somewhere. Many of them grew up watching a parent, perhaps you, equate providing with loving. They are doing exactly what they were taught. The tragedy is that they're repeating the very pattern that left them feeling unseen as children. The check writer doesn't need to send less. They need to show up more. Not with solutions, with curiosity. Type number 4, the efficiency expert. This child is a master of logistics. They have a shared calendar for your appointments. They created a medication spreadsheet. They rotate visit schedules with their siblings like a military operation. When they call, they have an agenda. When they visit, they have a time limit. I've got 30 minutes, Mom. Let's go through the list. And they're not wrong. Things get done. Bills get paid. Prescriptions get filled. Every practical need is met with precision. But let me ask you something. When was the last time this child stayed for no reason? When was the last time they sat down without a list and just talked? When was the last time you had a conversation that didn't start with logistics and end with a goodbye? The efficiency expert turns care into a task. And tasks have beginnings, middles, and ends. But a relationship is not a task. A relationship is open-ended. It's messy. It requires space for silence, for stories that go nowhere, for the kinds of conversations that can only happen when nobody is watching the clock. Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, wrote that meaning comes not from productivity, but from presence, from fully being with another human being without an agenda. Care that is scheduled down to the minute isn't care. It's project management. And I want to be fair here. Most efficiency experts are overwhelmed. They are balancing jobs, children, marriages, and the weight of watching a parent age. Structure is their coping mechanism. And I understand that. But structure without warmth is just logistics. And you don't need a more efficient child. You need a child who sometimes just sits with you, without a list, without a deadline, without looking at their phone. Type number 5, and this is the one that often goes unrecognized until it's done the most damage. I call this child the family narrator. The family narrator has decided how your family story goes. They know which topics are acceptable and which ones are off limits. They know which memories are shared at Thanksgiving and which ones are buried. They know exactly how the family should look, and their version of caring for you is making sure you play your part. You'll recognize this child by what they won't let you say. Let's not bring that up. That's in the past. We're not going to talk about that. It'll just upset everyone. Mom, that's not how it happened. The family narrator controls the story. And anyone who threatens the story, including you, gets gently, firmly redirected. In family systems theory, this is called role rigidity. Every family has unspoken rules about what can be said, what can be felt, and who gets to define reality. The family narrator is the enforcer of those rules, and they take on that role not because they want to silence you, but because the truth, whatever it is, threatens something they can't face. Maybe it's the divorce they never processed. Maybe it's the favoritism they don't want to admit. Maybe it's a wound between you and them that they've buried so deep that acknowledging it would mean rebuilding everything they believe about the family. And so they care for you within the script. They visit, they help, they show up, as long as everything stays on the surface. But the moment you try to say something honest, something painful, something real, something that doesn't fit the approved narrative, you get shut down. Gently, lovingly, even. But shut down nonetheless. When your child won't let you be honest, they're not protecting the family. They're protecting a version of it that never existed. And in doing so, they are denying you the one thing Erickson said matters most at this stage of life, the right to look back at your story, all of it, and say, this was mine. It was messy and imperfect and real, and it was mine. Now, if you recognized your child in one of those 5 types, maybe even in more than one, I want you to step back with me and see the larger pattern. Because there is one. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. All 5 types, the loving hijacker, the visible martyr, the check writer, the efficiency expert, the family narrator, they share one thing in common: care without curiosity. They all provide something. Decisions, effort, money, structure, a polished story. But none of them start with the question that actually matters. What do you want? 4 words. That's all it would take to change everything. Not, here's what I think is best for you. Not, I already handled it. Not, let's stay positive. Just, what do you want? That question honors your autonomy, your right to have a voice in your own life. It honors your relatedness, the genuine connection that comes from being seen, not managed. And it honors your competence, your ability to know yourself, to understand your own needs, even now. Especially now. Most adult children who fall into these patterns are not malicious. They're scared. They're overwhelmed. They're repeating dynamics they learned in childhood. And many of them, if they could see what they're doing, would want to change. But understanding why they do it does not mean you should accept it in silence. So what do you do with all of this? You don't start a war. You don't send a guilt trip. You don't forward this video with a passive-aggressive note, though I know that's tempting. What you do is this. You claim your voice. Clearly. Calmly. with the kind of dignity that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Erik Erikson said that the task of this stage of life is integration, looking at the full sweep of your years and finding peace with all of it. Viktor Frankl said that meaning comes from choosing, from making decisions that reflect your values, not someone else's fear. You cannot do either of those things if someone else is writing your script. So here are 3 sentences I want you to keep. You don't have to use them tomorrow, but hold on to them, practice them, and when the moment is right, and you'll know when that is, say them. Number 1. I appreciate everything you're doing, but can I tell you what would actually help me most? Number 2. I know you're busy and I know you're worried, but I need you to ask me before you decide. Number 3. I love that you care, but caring means listening, even when my answer surprises you. These are not confrontations. These are invitations. You're not attacking your child. You're inviting them into a relationship that is real, not performed, not managed, not controlled, not narrated by someone else. And I want to leave you with this. You have spent your entire life listening to what your children need. Through the fevers and the tantrums and the teenage silences and the wedding planning and the grandchildren and the career crises, you listened. You showed up. You asked. You have earned the right to be heard. Not managed, not scheduled. Not funded from a distance, not silenced to keep the peace. Heard. If you recognized your child in one of these 5 types today, I want you to know that you are not alone. This channel exists because your story matters. Your voice matters. Especially now. Especially in this chapter. If this video gave you words for something you've been feeling but couldn't name, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a sibling, a fellow parent who's been quietly wondering the same thing. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I share new insights every week here on Strong Elderly Life, about family, about aging, about the kind of wisdom that only comes from having lived long enough to see the patterns. And leave me a comment below. Tell me, which type did you recognize? You might be surprised how many people in this community have been through the exact same thing. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, you are not too old to be heard, and you are never too loved to be asked.